Hello, welcome to my channel and thanks for tuning into this video. Today I'm talking about the new Fenty Beauty powder foundation. It's called the Pro Filt'r Soft Matte Powder Foundation. And here it is. So if you'd like to see my thoughts on this powder foundation and hear about my experiences with it, just keep on watching. Now this foundation comes with 9.1 grams or 0.32 ounces. So if you think of a typical liquid foundation, that's usually a whole ounce. So it's obviously less than that, but the way you use these foundations can be very different and the amount that you need is different. If I look at my Makeup Forever Matte Velvet Skin, this has 11 grams in it. So that's a little bit more than what's in the Fenty, but I still think the Fenty is gonna last me a decent amount of time. So I kind of debated about what shade to get in this foundation. I have tried the original Fenty foundation. I bought the shade, I think it was 110, but I'll write down on the screen if that wasn't correct. But it was the fairest, it was the second fairest shade that they came out with in their original line. And it was cool toned. And I actually found that that tone was a little bit off for me. It was almost a little bit light or maybe too pink for me. So in addition to that, it just didn't wear very nicely on me. I didn't really like the way it looked on me, so I didn't get much use out of that one. And I didn't try the hydrating one because I couldn't find a shade that looked good for me when I was swatching them. But with this powder one, I was just really interested to try this. And so I ended up taking a bit of a risk and I ordered the shade 100, which is the fairest shade in the whole range. And it is said to have neutral undertones. So I kind of debated between this one and then whatever the fairest with cool undertones was. But when I looked at the pictures online, the cool undertone one looked really, really pink. So I thought that although this was such a fair shade, I thought I should give it a go. So that's what it looks like on my finger. And I'll just show you. You can barely see it because it is pretty much the color of my skin tone that's on the inside of my arm here, which is quite similar to the color of my face without makeup on, except that my face is a bit redder, but I think the neutral tone in this is nice to kind of deal with that redness a little bit. So I will show you some footage of me putting this on, but first I want to just talk about what I find the best way to put it on is. I've tried applying this foundation with a couple of different brushes. So first I tried with this one, which is the Sonia G Smooth Buffer, and it was okay, but it wasn't my favorite. It just didn't feel as easy to put on, and I figured I could do better. So then I tried with this Sonia G Mini Base from the Cakey set. And this is actually my favorite brush to use for this foundation. So you'll see me in the demo using this brush. And it's just really perfect. It's very nice and soft. This is made up of a combination of synthetic and goat hairs. And it moves very easily. You can see it's quite flexible there. And although it is quite small, I find it just works really well for this powder foundation because you can get into all those small places, but it kind of splays out enough that it's easier to cover the larger parts of the face as well without too much trouble, really. And it just gives a really nice buildable coverage. So you can start out with a very light layer and it's just a light coverage, and you can build and build and build. What I like to do if I need to build it on certain areas, or if I would like to build it on certain areas, is I actually like to take the sponge that comes in this foundation, and I take that, and you'll see this in the demo too, I kind of just pat it on any areas where I have blemishes or more redness that I want to cover up. I just pat it on there. And then ideally I would wait a couple of minutes. So I would pat it on those spots and then I'd like do my brows or something. And then I go in with the brush and take more powder on the brush and cover the rest of my face, as well as blend in those spots with a bit more coverage. So I find that method works very, very well for this. So I'll show you the footage now of me applying this. Now, I do still like to wear concealer underneath this. What I've been using mostly is the Armani Luminous Silk Concealer, and I like this for a couple of reasons with the Fenty foundation. I like that it has a bit more of a luminous finish. It's not dewy by any means, I don't think, but it does have, it's not a completely matte finish, whereas the powder is a bit more matte, although for a powder foundation, I find it quite radiant in its own way. But anyway, so I like it for the finish, this concealer, and I also like it because the tone is a little bit darker, and I find that it just meshes well with this, which is quite a light shade, although it is a good shade for me. But I find the two together sort of balance each other out, so I'm not looking too chalky or anything like that. Now, in terms of how this foundation wears, I find it wears quite well. I think it can take a touch up at around the 5 or 6 hour mark. I like to do maybe just a little touch up just around the nose. And again, I would use this brush or even the sponge that's in the compact for that. It's not entirely necessary though, so I could go the whole day without touching up and none of it wears off or anything. It's just that I get a little bit oily in those areas right there. And the finish, which I mentioned earlier, I suppose it's matte, but it's a very soft matte and it doesn't look makeup-y at all. It's not a cakey kind of finish or anything like that, which is kind of what I think of. If I think of a powder foundation, my first thought is it's gonna be like cakey and heavy and dry looking. This is none of those things, which is kind of a miracle to me. I don't know how they've done it, but it's a very beautiful finish on the product. It does still allow for a little bit of that sort of lit from within, a sort of luminosity from the skin is still able to come through with this. Now, I mentioned it's buildable, which it is, and I don't know if it's buildable to full coverage. I haven't tried that simply because I'm not really interested in having a full coverage, but certainly it looks great with a light coverage, and it also looks good when it's built up to a bit more of a medium coverage. This works well as an all-over foundation, but I also really like it as more of a setting powder, or as I would normally use my Makeup Forever foundation, just to add a little bit of coverage in certain areas and a little bit of mattification in certain areas. So I find it works really well for that as well. And I also mentioned in my Chanel foundation video that I like this paired with that foundation because that one's a little bit too warm for me. I accidentally or unwittingly, I suppose, bought a golden undertone shade, which while it's still very fair, it does have a little bit more warmth than would be perfect for me. But when I add this with it, although it's a neutral shade, it's so fair and it leans to me more toward a cooler tone than a warmer tone, although I do feel that it is neutral. I find the Fenty shades can go very strong in either direction. So the ones that are termed cool undertone shades, very pink. The ones that are termed warm undertone shades are very yellow, but the neutrals seem to be sort of the answer for me. So it makes me curious to know whether a neutral tone would have suited me better in either of their other liquid foundations. I wanted to compare this with some of my other foundations. So you can see it's very, very light. It may darken a little bit once it gets onto the skin, and that might be why it doesn't look too light when I have it on. But I'm not sure. But it doesn't darken too much. I know that. It doesn't seem to oxidize or become orange at all. So there's the Fenty. First, I want to compare it to the only other powder foundation that I have, which is the Makeup Forever Matte Velvet Skin in the shade R210. Okay, I think you can see you can see a lot more beiginess and a little bit more depth in that Makeup Forever. And I also wanted to pull in my Chantecaille Eclat Doux powder. While this is not really a foundation powder, it doesn't have the same kind of coverage. It is very light in tone. And if you look at those two together, they do look somewhat similar in tone. So let's see how that tone compares. So that looks even whiter than the Fenty one. And it does have, of course, a different finish. It has a little bit of a shinier finish. And then I also wanted to compare it with two of my lightest liquid foundation shades. So I have the Gucci in 110C, and I have the Pat McGrath in Light 1. This is another foundation, kind of like the original Fenty, that I find this almost too light for me. So I'm kind of curious to see how these will all compare to one another. All right, so here are those three. On the top, we have the Pat McGrath in Light 1. Here's the Fenty powder. And here is the Gucci in 110C. Obviously, it's a little bit hard to tell because the finishes are different with a liquid versus a powder foundation. But actually, all of these tones look somewhat similar. The Fenty, although it is termed a neutral shade, to me is looking a little bit more pink, but that could be because it looks a little bit more sheer and my pink skin is showing through. But certainly I would say the Gucci looks a little bit more peachy than the Fenty. And the Pat McGrath is looking, yeah, it almost looks a little bit lighter, although I'm not sure that it's showing up like that, but it seems to have more of a whiteness in it, a tiny bit more of a chalkiness to it than these other two here. So again, that's the Pat McGrath in Light 1, Fenty in 100, and the Gucci in 110C. I think those are my main points that I wanted to make about this new Fenty powder foundation. I think this is a very good product, very good quality. It doesn't have a scent, which I was almost a little disappointed in because I really love the scent of the original Fenty foundation. It kind of smells like vanilla and baby powder or something. I really like that scent, but this doesn't have any fragrance. It almost has kind of a rubbery smell to it, but it's quite faint. It reminds me of the smell of rubber swim caps, but you can't smell it when it's on your face or anything. It's only when you go right up and sniff the powder itself that you would notice that, I think. So those are my main observations and thoughts about this foundation. I've worn it several times now, so I feel like I do have a good base of experience to inform this review. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those down below. If you'd like to see more from me, I would love to have you subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.